The banquet hall on Diplomatic Station Haven 9 had never looked so good, and it had never mattered so little. 3 species had spent 11 days preparing it. The Vorath had shipped living flamefish from their home ocean, kept alive in glowing suspension tanks that cast orange light across the walls. The Selûne had constructed towers of crystallized nectar, each one taller than a grown man, carved into the shapes of stars and open hands. Councillor Brev of the Galactic Sovereignty had personally approved a menu of 47 dishes sourced from 9 different star systems. He had slept 4 hours in 3 days. He had a headache that had not stopped since Tuesday. He stood at the entrance to the hall and watched the Dragon Queen walk through it. Sorvith of the Drakai did not stop. She did not look left or right. She moved in a straight line from the entrance to the far exit, her dark scales catching the light of the flamefish tanks, her amber eyes fixed ahead, her 4 advisors trailing behind her in perfect silence. The hall was full of 40 representatives from across the sovereignty, all of them standing, all of them watching. Not one of them spoke. The Queen's footsteps were the only sound. Then she was gone. The doors closed. Nobody moved for a moment. Then everyone turned to look at Brev. Brev looked at Station Chief Oya. Oya was a compact woman with short grey hair and the expression of someone who had already done her research and was not surprised. She had read the briefing files. She had, in fact, sent Brev 3 separate memos about this exact situation, all of which he had ignored because he believed his feast would be different. "She does this," Oya said quietly. "She does this," Brev repeated. His voice was flat. For 200 years, no feast, no offering, no gift. The Drakai believe that accepting food is an act of submission. Their queen is not permitted to submit to anything, not to hunger, not to hospitality, not to politics. It is part of their code. Oya picked up a small piece of crystallized nectar from the nearest tower and ate it. It was very good. You were warned. Brev said nothing. He stared at the 47 dishes going cold. Sorvith, meanwhile, had gone to her assigned suite. It was the best on the station, which meant it was comfortable by human standards and merely functional by Drakai ones. Her advisors stood in the outer room. She stood at the window and looked at the blue gas giant below, slow and enormous, wrapped in its own storms. She was not hungry. She was never hungry in places like this. She had learned a long time ago to eat before arriving anywhere she was expected to be fed. The food at these events was never for her. It was always a trap dressed up as generosity. Eat this, and you have accepted something. Accept something, and you have shown weakness. Show weakness, and every species in the room takes one small step toward believing they can get more from you than you intend to give. She had not survived 2 centuries of galactic politics by accepting soup from strangers. The ventilation system made a noise. It was a small noise at first, a low hiss from behind the ceiling panel above her bed. Then it became a louder hiss. Then the room temperature began to rise. One of her advisors checked the wall controls and reported that the system was showing a fault code and was not responding to manual input. Sorvith looked at the ceiling. The ceiling looked back at her. "Get someone to fix it," she said. Her advisor sent a request to station maintenance. The reply came back in 4 minutes. A technician was being dispatched. In the meantime, the suite was not recommended for occupancy as the temperature would continue to climb. They suggested the Queen wait in the observation corridor on level 3, which had separate ventilation and was currently unoccupied. Sorvith walked to the observation corridor on level 3. It was a plain hallway, bare metal walls, a long window running the length of one side looking out at the gas giant, a row of conduit pipes along the ceiling. There was a bench. She did not sit on it. She stood at the window and looked out at the planet and was, for the moment, completely alone, which was the closest thing she had to peace. The corridor door at the far end opened. A human walked in. He was wearing worn grey coveralls with a small station patch on the shoulder. He was carrying a toolbox in one hand and a battered insulated box in the other. He was not looking at her. He was looking at a small screen attached to his wrist, reading something, walking and reading at the same time the way humans often did, like they believed nothing in the universe would step in front of them. He was about 10 steps away when he looked up. He stopped. He looked at her, she looked at him. He looked at her again, differently this time, the way someone looked at a thing they were trying to quickly identify and categorize. Then he said, "Sorry, I need to get to the panel on that wall. It'll just take a minute." He pointed at the wall behind her. She stared at him. He waited, she stepped aside. Not because he asked politely, though he had. Not because she respected his work, though she did not yet have a reason not to. She stepped aside because she was so completely caught off guard by a small creature pointing at the wall behind her and waiting, with no fear at all, that her body moved before her mind caught up. He stepped past her and crouched down in front of the panel. He set the toolbox on the floor and opened it. Then he set the insulated box beside it, also on the floor, because he needed both hands and had no third option. He pulled out a flat tool and started working the panel screws. Sorvath watched. He was not nervous. He was not performing calmness either, the way her advisors sometimes did, perfectly still, breathing carefully, trying to show her they were not afraid. This man was simply not afraid. He was thinking about the panel. She could tell because he made a small sound when one of the screws was stuck, something between a click of the tongue and a quiet word she did not recognize, and then he tried a different tool. The insulated box was closed, but not sealed. She could smell it. She had been near food all day. The banquet hall had smelled of 47 dishes, heavy and rich, and layered with the effort of people who wanted something from her. She had walked through that smell like walking through smoke and thought nothing of it. This was different. It was warm, that was the first thing. Not hot the way fire was hot, but warm the way a room was warm after people had been living in it for a while. There was something savory in it, something low and deep, some kind of spice she could not name, and under that a bread smell, soft and plain. It was not trying to be impressive. It was not trying at all. It was just sitting there on the floor, warm. In a corridor. She looked at the box. She looked back at the gas giant. She looked at the box again. The man finished with the panel and pulled it open. He reached in and did things she could not see. Then he picked up the insulated box and set it on the ledge beside the open panel, and he opened it. The smell came out fully, and she did not move, but everything in her became very still in a different way than before. Inside the box was a container of something soft and brown, thick with color, steam still rising from it. Beside it was flat bread folded over itself. There was a small jar of something deep orange red, and there were 2 round spiral cookies wrapped in thin paper, and on the paper someone had drawn a dragon with a crown on its head in bright crayon, green and gold, and underneath it in the large uneven letters of a child, the words, "For Daddy's boring workday." The man opened the container, and the smell of cumin and chili and slow-cooked lentils filled the corridor. He started eating, standing, one eye on the open panel. He ate a piece of bread. He ate from the container with a short, flat spoon. He worked between bites, checking something inside the panel, making a small adjustment, eating again. Sorvath realized she had been watching him for some time. He looked over and noticed her looking at the box, or perhaps at him. It was hard to say. "My daughter packed it," he said. He was not explaining exactly. He was just saying it, the way someone said something out loud because the silence had gotten a shape. "She packs my lunch every day. She thinks the food here is bad." He glanced at the cookies in their paper wrapping. "She's not wrong." Sorvath said nothing. He looked back at the panel. "The drawing is hers too. She's 8. She's very into dragons right now." He ate one of the cookies. He folded the wrapper and put it in his pocket, not in the box, and Sorvath noted that without knowing why she noted it. He finished eating. He put the lids back on everything and closed the insulated box. He worked on the panel for another few minutes, replaced the screws, and stood up. He picked up both boxes. "Should be fixed. Have a good one," he said, and walked back the way he came. The corridor smelled of cumin and warm bread for a long time after he left. That night in the repaired suite, with the ventilation working and the room cool and her advisors quiet in the outer room, Sorvath lay still and looked at the ceiling. The banquet hall had had 47 dishes. She had not thought of a single one since leaving it. She thought about the lentils. She thought about the bread. She thought about a child who packed a lunch for her father so his boring work day would have something good in it, and drew him a dragon with a crown so he would have something to smile at. She stared at the ceiling for a long time. The negotiations on day 3 were not going well, which meant they were going the same as they always went. Sorvath sat at the long table in the main chamber and said very little. She did not need to say much. Her position was clear. The Drakai wanted a sovereign clause giving their systems full veto authority over sovereignty trade routes that passed within their territorial boundaries. Councillor Brev wanted her to accept a watered-down review process with no actual stopping power, dressed up in language designed to sound like an agreement. She had been doing this for 2 centuries. She could read the language of a diplomatic clause the way others read a road sign. Brev talked, his team talked. Oya sat to one side and said nothing, which Sorvath had begun to appreciate about the human woman. The session broke for recess at midday. Sorvath's advisors expected her to return to her suite. Instead, she walked. She walked without explaining where she was going, which meant her advisors followed at a distance, because following at a distance was what they did when she did not want to be talked to. She walked through the administrative corridor on level 2, past the communications hub, and down the access stairs to level 3. She walked to maintenance corridor 7C. The panel was closed. The corridor was empty. The ventilation hummed. She stood at the window and looked at the gas giant and felt, for a moment, like something slightly less than the nation she was supposed to be. She walked back. The next day, at midday, she did it again. The panel was still closed, but the man named Dale was there. He was sitting on the floor with his back against the wall, which was not a dignified posture, and he was reading a small folded piece of paper and smiling. His insulated box was open beside him. The smell of rice and warm seasoning moved through the corridor like something with an intention. She stopped without deciding to stop. He looked up. This time he recognized her, or recognized that she was important, which she could tell by the small pause before he moved. But he did not stand up. He did not straighten. He just looked at her from the floor and said, "Hi." She looked at the piece of paper in his hand. "The child sends written messages with food," she said. It was not a question, it was an observation, and she told herself that was different. "Every day," he said. He looked at the paper again briefly. "Since her mum died, about 2 years ago, she started doing it so I'd have company at lunch." He folded the note and tucked it in his chest pocket, the same pocket she had seen him put the cookie wrapper in the day before. "She worries I eat alone." Sorvath stood in the corridor for a moment. "Do you?" she said. "Usually, yeah." He said it without any weight on it. "It's a big station." She left. In the chamber that afternoon, something happened that had not happened in 200 years of Drakai diplomacy. Sorvath looked at Brev's proposal and said she would accept the joint review process if the council composition gave Drakai representatives binding authority over emergency trade interruptions only. It was a small thing. It was also not nothing. It was movement. Brev looked like a man who had just been told he had won a prize he had stopped believing in. He accepted before she could say anything else. Oya said nothing during the session. After the session, she went to her office and pulled up the station's movement records and asked the AI to overlay the Queen's corridor paths against maintenance worker Dale's scheduled lunch breaks over the past 3 days. The AI showed her 3 overlaps, all at midday, all in corridor 7C. Oya looked at the data for a long time. Then she closed it without filing a report, stood up, and went to get herself some of the Selûne crystallized nectar from the banquet hall, which was still sitting there because nobody had touched it, and which turned out to be quite good. By day 6, Sorvath had stopped pretending she was going somewhere else. She walked to corridor 7C at midday. She did not take a different route to see how it felt. She did not tell her advisors she was checking on a ventilation concern. She walked there, and her advisors followed at their respectful distance, and she stood at the window with the gas giant below, and Dale arrived 3 minutes later. He saw her and nodded. He sat down on the floor and opened his insulated box. Today it was a thermos of soup, thick bread, and an apple, simpler than before. He poured the soup into the cup that attached to the top of the thermos. He ate for a while without speaking. She stood at the window. The soup smelled of tomato and something herbed and warm. He poured a second cup. Then he looked at it. Then he set it on the ledge between the window and the wall, which was roughly at her shoulder height, and said, "Made too much. It'll just go cold." He looked back at the thermos and poured himself more. Sorveth looked at the cup. It was a small cup. It was plain. There was nothing in the gesture except the practical fact of soup going cold. No presentation, no ceremony, no hope hanging off it. She picked it up. She drank. The soup was warm, and the herb in it was something she did not have a name for, and it tasted like something someone had made with care, not to impress, just because it was worth making properly. She said nothing about it. Dale finished his bread. "Rena wants to be a xenobiologist," he said. "She tells me every few weeks. Sometimes she wants to be a pilot, but she always comes back to xenobiologist." He pulled out his personal device and turned it to show her the screen. She drew what she thinks a Drakai looks like. Sorveth looked at the screen. The drawing showed a creature with 6 legs, large feathered wings in bright purple, a round friendly face, and a very large smile showing flat square teeth. It was wearing some kind of hat. There were stars around it, also smiling. "She looked it up," Dale said, "and then she drew what she thought was better." Sorveth's scales moved. It was not something she chose. Along her jaw and the sides of her neck, the dark color shifted slightly, one shade warmer. In Drakai physiology, it was a small and involuntary thing, like the corner of a human mouth pulling up before the person knew they were about to smile. "Show me the others," she said. He looked at her. "She draws one every day," Sorveth said. "You said so." Dale turned the device back and opened a folder. He held it out. There were hundreds of drawings, 2 years of lunches, alien creatures and spaceships and animals she did not recognize, and some that she did, a small girl's ideas of what the universe looked like, made in crayon and marker and whatever was near, one of them clearly made in pencil on a piece of brown packing paper. "She does all of this," Sorveth said, "so you are not alone." "Yeah," Dale said. She held the device and moved through the drawings slowly. "She is very small," Sorveth said, "to carry that much." Dale was quiet for a moment. "She doesn't think of it as carrying anything, she just loves me." He took the device back gently. "Kids are like that." He packed up his things. He stood, nodded once, and walked back down the corridor. Sorveth stayed. She stood at the window for 17 minutes. The gas giant turned below her, slow and indifferent, the same as it had been for 1 billion years before her and would be for 1 billion years after. The station's biosensors, had anyone been looking, would have shown something they had never shown before for a Drakai queen in a neutral diplomatic zone. Her territorial indicators were flat. She was not guarding. She was not calculating. She was just standing there. The final session of negotiations lasted 2 hours and ended with a treaty that would be quoted in political analysis for the next 40 years. Sorveth gave ground that no one had expected. A joint review council with real teeth. Drakai cultural preservation zones written into the sovereignty charter. Trade route approval timelines that gave her people actual authority, not the appearance of it. Brev signed everything with a hand that was shaking slightly and said nothing because there was nothing to say when someone gives you more than you asked for. When it was over, he announced a closing feast. Sorveth stood and said, quietly, that she would not be attending. Brev had stopped being surprised by this. He nodded and thanked her for her generosity at the table. The word generosity was doing a lot of work in that sentence. He did not ask what had changed. He was a diplomat. He had learned that some questions were only worth asking if you were ready for the answer to be something you did not understand. Oya pulled Sorvath aside briefly in the corridor outside the chamber. She said, "Thank you. I mean that outside of any official capacity, thank you." Sorvath looked at her. "Your maintenance worker," she said. "He eats alone." Oya blinked. "I'll look into the scheduling." Sorvath nodded and walked away. She found Dale in the small human common room on level 2, a plain space with 4 tables and a vending unit and a window that faced the wrong way, away from the gas giant, looking out at open dark. He was the only one in there. His insulated box was on the table and it was almost empty. He had been there a while. She sat across from him. He looked at her. He did not say anything, which she had begun to expect and which she appreciated. "The negotiations closed," she said. "I heard," he said. "Congratulations, I think, or is that not something you say?" "I don't know," she said. "I have never had someone say it to me." He pushed the insulated box across the table toward her. Inside, there was one last cookie, wrapped in paper. The drawing on it showed a girl and a dragon standing together, the girl's hand raised and the dragon's claw raised, touching at the tips. Under it, in the careful, large print of a child who was trying her best to write neatly, were the words, "Maybe she is lonely too." Sorvath looked at the drawing. "She asked me about my lunches," Dale said. He sounded a little embarrassed. "I told her I'd been eating near someone. She wanted to know who. I described her." He paused. "I didn't describe her that well. Rena doesn't know she's a queen. She just heard dragon and ran with it." Sorvath picked up the drawing. She held it carefully, the way she held formal documents, but the expression on her face was not a formal expression. "I have no children," she said. Dale said nothing. He let the silence sit, which was not everyone's instinct, but was the right one. A Drakai queen does not form those bonds. She is the nation. Every attachment is a risk. Every vulnerability is a door. She looked at the drawing. "I have eaten in ceremonial halls for 100 years, and no one has ever made food for me. They make food at me. They make food to see what I will do with it." She set the drawing down on the table between them. "This is the first time in a very long time that something warm was left near me without wanting anything back." Dale looked at the drawing too. Then he said, "That sounds really lonely." He said it the way someone said a wiring fault sounds like a pain. Simple, true, not a trap. "Yes," she said. He didn't say anything else, and she didn't leave, and they sat in the plain room with the window facing the open dark and the last cookie between them. After a while she asked if Rena would consider drawing something to send to her, not to Dale, directly to her. She said she would need an address that could receive it. Dale said he would ask. She stood, she walked to the door. In the doorway she stopped and looked at the wall and not at him, because it was easier that way, and she said, "The soup last time, it was adequate." Behind her, Dale smiled. 3 months later, the political analysts were still arguing about what had happened at Haven 9. 12 different papers had been published across the Sovereignty Academic Network. The Vorath submitted a formal inquiry into whether there had been some form of cultural error in their Flamefish presentation. The Selûne quietly hired a new diplomatic team. Brev gave 2 interviews in which he carefully implied he had understood the situation all along, and Oya watched both of them from her office and said nothing out loud. Nobody thought to look at the lunch. On a Tuesday morning, in a small apartment on the 3rd floor of a building in the city where Dale had grown up, Rena answered the door to find a sovereignty courier holding a package marked with the seal of the Drakai throne world. She took it with both hands because it was heavier than it looked. Inside, wrapped in dark cloth, was a tile of black volcanic glass, smooth on one side, the other side pressed with a scale pattern, deep and precise, the kind of thing that took time and intention. Underneath, it was a card with text in 2 languages. The translation on the back read, "Your drawings will be kept in the archive hall where only things of worth are stored. You are not as small as you seem." Rena read it twice, then she got out her markers. She drew Sorvath eating lunch at a table. She gave Sorvath a large plate of food and a warm drink. She drew the stars outside the window. She drew Sorvath's face as happy as she could make it look, which involved some artistic interpretation since she was working from her father's descriptions. She wrote at the bottom, "I am glad you have lunch now," from Rena. She folded it and gave it to her father to send, and then she went back to her room and started drawing a second one because she had decided the Queen should not just get one. Dale was promoted to senior technical lead 2 weeks later. Oya told him it was based on his service record and the maintenance review scores, which was true. She did not tell him the other thing, which was that she had decided that any man who accidentally broke 2 centuries of diplomatic deadlock by eating lentils in a corridor was someone the station needed to keep at a higher pay grade. He accepted the promotion and said he hoped the new role would not take him off maintenance rotations entirely because he liked the corridors. On the Drakai homeworld, in the throne hall where the windows were tall and the stone walls carried the weight of an ancient people, Sorvath started a new tradition. At midday in her private chamber, a simple meal was brought. Not a feast, not a ceremony, no presentation, no arrangement of rare fauna, no towers of crystallized anything, just food, prepared well, served warm. Her advisors did not know what to do with this. They discussed it for weeks. One suggested it was a political statement about Drakai self-sufficiency. Another believed it was a coded message to the sovereignty. A third wrote a 12-page analysis arguing it was a spiritual practice referenced in a minor text from 400 years ago. None of them were right. None of them asked her. She would have told them, if they had asked, that it was adequate. In a new station 3 systems away, Dale opened his insulated box at midday. Inside was rice and chickpeas with a sauce that smelled of garlic and warm tomato. There was bread. There was a note from Rena about a test she had passed and a bird she had seen from the school window. And there, tucked against the side of the box, was a small piece of dark glass with a scale pattern pressed into one side. Rena had sent it so he would know she was thinking of him. So he would not feel alone. He held the tile for a moment, then set it beside his box where he could see it while he ate. Somewhere across the stars, a dragon queen sat in a quiet room with warm food in front of her and 2 crayon drawings framed on the wall beside the window. And the silence around her was no longer the silence of a person who has decided to need nothing. It was something else, something smaller and better. Humanity, the galaxy had agreed for a long time, was an unremarkable species. No ancient culture, no vast fleets, no particular gift for war or commerce or philosophy. What they had, apparently, was this. And it turned out to be enough.